Sometimes it's the little things that make a big difference. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Input English. In today's episode, I'd like to explore how sometimes it's the little things that almost go unnoticed that make big differences in one's life. We go back to the time that I was in the 6th grade and I was 11 years old. The 6th grade was the highest grade in that school, and we would all be moving the following year to the high school that at that time was grades 7 through 12. Now, something that the high school had that the elementary school did not have was a band program. So the band director from the high school came over to our elementary school, and we were asked if we wanted to maybe join the band. Those of us who answered yes were sent at the appropriate time to the auditorium to meet with the band director from the high school. He was assisted by another musician who turned out to be a salesman for the big music store in town. The band director spoke to all the children. Then one by one, we were invited to come up and talk to him individually about what instrument we might want to play. When it was my turn, I went to the band director and he said, "What would you like to play?" And I said, "Trumpet." And he said, "Let me see your teeth." So I showed him my teeth, and he made a decision at that point that I was not suitable to play the trumpet. So he said, "Clarinet." And I said, "No, I don't want to play the clarinet." And he said, "With those teeth, you need to play the clarinet or maybe a saxophone." And I said, "I want to play the trumpet." He said, "It's clarinet or maybe a saxophone." He took out a small piece of paper, as he had done with all the other children, and he wrote clarinet, and in parentheses he wrote saxophone. He handed me that piece of paper to take it home to my parents, and then I could take that with my parents to the music store to rent an instrument for the upcoming school year. After that session with the band director, my parents and I went to the music store with my little piece of paper that said clarinet, parentheses, saxophone, and I presented that to the salesman. Now, the salesman in this music store was the same fellow who was assisting the band director at our school. So he read the piece of paper and said, "Ah, clarinet." And I said, "No." He said, "Well, you could play saxophone." Okay. Now, he was standing behind the counter, and we were in front of the counter. And behind him on the wall were musical instruments on display, and there were 3 saxophones hanging on the wall, each one with its price displayed next to it. So he looked at me and said, "Which one would you like?" And I immediately said, "Tenor." And of course, at the same time, my parents were both looking at the prices of these instruments, and they quickly discerned that the tenor saxophone was $30 more to buy than would be an alto. So they determined that I would be playing the alto saxophone. To which I said, "No, I want to play tenor. I really want to play trumpet." There were a lot of decisions being made, but the one person who wasn't being called upon to make those decisions was me. So we left the store with an alto saxophone, and the following year, I joined the band as a beginner, and I did okay. Our band class was 1 hour a day, and we got to play the instruments, and then the assumption was that we would play them at home to practice. And we had a book with music to practice so that we could get better. Over the next 2 years, I played alto saxophone and did okay. I learned how to read music in the treble clef and learned a lot about music theory and learned how to play the alto saxophone. The fundamental problem is I didn't love it. I didn't have much desire to play the alto saxophone. It was just something I was supposed to do. And in the back of my mind, I wondered what it would be like to play the trumpet instead. Toward the end of the 8th grade, I was waiting in the band room for the time that my mother would come pick up the kids so that we could go home. Usually she would allow some extra time to make sure all the kids were there so that she only had to make one trip. So it was common that I would spend some time in the band room, which was fine with me. On this particular day, there was something going on in the band room. It was up in the corner of the band room, and the band director was trying to teach one of the big kids in our class how to play the sousaphone, a big bass horn with a big circular wrap that would be used for the marching band. There were 3 chairs, and each chair had a rack mounted to the chair that held a sousaphone. That way the weight of this heavy horn was not on the player, it was on the chair, and the player would just get into it and be comfortable. This was great. So the band director was in one chair, the big kid was in the other, and the 3rd chair with its sousaphone was empty. So I came over and watched, and the band director was trying to get the big kid to make some sounds with the sousaphone. As I watched how this unfolded, I slipped into the other horn and watched from that vantage point. My recollection is that the other kid who was supposedly learning how to play the sousaphone wasn't picking it up very quickly. So at one point, I put my mouth to the mouthpiece and blew in the horn that was in my chair. And a sound came out, and it sounded pretty good. This surprised the band director. He turned to me, he was astonished. He said, "Do that again." And I did. So now he was teaching both kids how to play sousaphone, trying to see if we had any aptitude, see if we had any interest in playing the sousaphone. So this went on for perhaps a half an hour, and he taught me what the buttons do on the valves and how that changes the pitch. And we played several different notes. And I recall to this day the pleasant sensation of the vibration of that horn when it made those very low sounds. It was very pleasant. When the time came for me to go, because my mother would be outside and it was time to go for my ride home, I turned to the band director and I said, "Could I take this home and play it at home?" He said, "Sure." So I picked it up and carried it out to the sidewalk outside the band room, and in a couple of minutes my mother showed up in her car, and there I was standing with a sousaphone. She wasn't really sure what this was all about, and so she asked me, what are you up to?" And I said, "Oh, it comes apart. If you open the trunk, I'll put it in the trunk. It comes apart." So she opened the trunk of the car. I took the bell off, put it in the car, put the rest of the sousaphone in the car, and we drove home. And that was the beginning of my journey playing the sousaphone. Now, the sousaphone is an instrument usually used for marching bands and sometimes concert bands. And the name sousaphone is related to the musician and band director named John Philip Sousa. Sousa was a composer, and he wrote a great deal of music, most of which were marches. So it was his influence on bands that caused the development of the sousaphone, which was a bass horn that he specified. The other modern bass horn that has a similar voice is a tuba. And the tuba is usually used in orchestras or concert bands, and it is not ordinarily used for marching. So our band had sousaphones. Well, this worked out very well because in contrast to the saxophone, I really enjoyed playing the sousaphone. And my parents were happy to find out that I would be playing a school-owned horn, so they didn't have to purchase another instrument. That was helpful to them. And they were also happy to pay for music lessons, that is, private lessons for me to learn the sousaphone quicker. Well, it turns out that I was among the only students this band director had ever had who played the sousaphone and also took lessons and practiced. So he was very happy as my ability improved over time. Now, band directors are in charge of lots of things, including the purchase of the instruments that the band uses to make its music. And the bass horns are typically owned by the band. This band director had a budget, and he was faced with a new reality because he had a young bass horn player, sousaphone player, me, who was practicing and taking lessons and getting better. So he started looking into buying a tuba for the concert band. He did buy a tuba for the concert band. And when it arrived, he called me in and said, "You see that?" pointing to the tuba. I said, "Yes." He said, "That's yours to play as long as you are first chair." Fabulous. So I got to take that horn home and play it. For me, it's a lot more fun to play a tuba than it is to play a sousaphone. So that was more than 40 years ago. Tonight, after dinner, I will go to one of the local high schools for a band rehearsal. But this isn't a high school band. This is a community band. This is a bunch of people. Some of them are young people. Some of them are middle-aged. Some of them are retirees. A whole bunch of people who will play in a band tonight. And I will go with my tuba and we will play music together in rehearsal. We rehearse every Monday evening, and then 3 or 4 times a year, we give concerts. This is not a money-making endeavor. This is not a business. This is for the joy of making music with other musicians. Sometimes it's the little things that make the big difference. The reason I'm going to play the tuba tonight in the band is because when I wanted to play the trumpet, I was told no. When I was given a saxophone, I didn't really like it. And then by chance, I had an opportunity to blow a few notes in a sousaphone and realized that I had found my instrument. I had found my voice, and now I had something I really, really wanted. So now, more than 40 years later, I'm going to go play a tuba in the band. Sometimes it's the little things. That's the end of this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you've had experiences where the little things made a big difference, share that with us in the comments, if you please. Of course, we like people to like and subscribe. That helps us grow the channel. And I hope you join us in future videos. Cheers.